Good morning. This morning we'll be reading from Mark 4, verses, it says 4. Well, it's one of them, so either this one's wrong or that one's wrong. But we're reading from that. I think the words are the same. Yep. I hope. Andrew's not here today, so in the spirit of Andrew, and especially with his mother-in-law, if you're going to have a heart attack, I think the best place to have one's probably in the hospital. So with great conviction, God is good. All the time. And all the time. Amen. All right, you should have found it by now, whichever one it is, Mark or 4 or 5. That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was, in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified, and they asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him."
The SS Edmund Fitzgerald was an American Great Lakes freighter that sank in a Lake Superior storm on November the 10th, 1975, with the loss of the entire crew of 29. When launched on June the 8th, 1958, she was the largest ship on North America's Great Lakes, and she remains the largest to have ever sunk there. Carrying a full cargo of ore pellets with Captain Ernest M. McSorley in command, she embarked on her final voyage from Superior, Wisconsin on the afternoon of November the 9th, 1975, en route to a steel mill near Detroit, Michigan. The Fitzgerald joined a second freighter, the SS Arthur M. Anderson. By the next day, the two ships were caught in the midst of a severe winter storm on Lake Superior, with wind steady at 68 miles per hour and gusting up to 80, and waves up to 35 feet. Shortly after 7 p.m., the Fitzgerald suddenly sank in Canadian waters 530 feet down. They were approximately 15 nautical miles or 17 miles from the entrance to Whitefish Bay near the cities of Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. Good morning. It's always a good omen when it's your turn to preach and your wife decides, "I'd rather go upstairs with the 2-year-olds." So, I got that going for me. But one of the things that's been fortunate in our life is that we had the opportunity to live in Wisconsin. We lived 1.5 miles from Lake Michigan. And I can tell you, the lake is a constant source of communication and talk. If you're there in the summer, it is nice because if you're up close to the lake, it feels like there's an air conditioner on you. Thunderstorms, my goodness. There's been some I could not believe. In the wintertime, talks about cold. I left Virginia, and don't ask me why, to move to Wisconsin. I came walking across the parking lot in December, and the moisture in my eyes froze. I knew that I wasn't that smart. But you really don't know cold until you get on a plane and you fly from Milwaukee to Detroit and it's just one sheet of ice. Then it starts to get cold. But they tell you, if you live in Wisconsin, if you don't like the weather, Matt, hang around about 15 minutes, it's going to change. For you long-suffering Eagle fans, and there are a bunch of you, you remember this game in Chicago. Randall Cunningham. The first half, it looked like this. You came out of the locker room to play the second half and you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. It changes drastically and quickly. Every boat on Lake Michigan today carries some type of GPS and a weather alert device because of those quickly changing weather conditions. And the one thing that I've heard is that sometimes that the lakes can be worse than the ocean. Because the lake's kind of like your bathtub. It just goes back and forth like this. And I guarantee you, any of you that have grandkids, or if you remember when you were a kid, how much fun it was to get your feet up against the front of the tub and see how much water you could splash up on the wall. That's what happens when you get one of these storms. It is constantly like this. And you were able to see quickly from the slides what it looked like on Lake Superior. I think it gives us a little idea possibly of what the disciples may have felt like that night. Now, they were on a state-of-the-art freighter. This is most likely what the boat looked like that the disciples were in that evening. And you can see it's pretty quaint, pretty tight quarters. And they even call this the Jesus boat. This is a first century fishing boat. But to really understand this whole 4 or 5 verses is you've got to understand this one and get this one question. Whose idea was it to get in the boat? Who was it, Warren? It was Jesus' idea to get in the boat. Why do you think he made that decision? Well, if you start looking at composites, you saw that Jesus was constantly in demand. Everywhere he went, there were crowds of people. There was no shortage of who needed help. And when you go back just earlier in chapter 4, it says in verses 1 and part of verse 2, it says, again, Jesus began to teach by the lake. The crowd that gathered around him was so large that he got into a boat and sat in it out on the lake. While all the people were along the shores at the water's edge, he taught them many things by parables. So these crowds, this was kind of like if we were having a concert and you had the Beatles and you had Bruce Springsteen and Lady Gaga all headlining. The number of people that would be out there to come, it's just unbelievable. Jesus was a rock star. These people were coming to see him. They wanted to hear what he had to say, the things that he was doing. They wanted to see that. But it also meant there were a lot of long hours. They spent a lot of time giving, giving, giving. And at some point, you have to just kind of go, I think I need a little bit of a break. And you need rest. And I think a lot of us, if you're in the business world or even if you're at home, can relate. There are days when it seems like you're on the phone constantly, trying to put out fires, handle stuff. If you're in the business world, you're in meetings. And every meeting I've ever gone to leads to homework assignments. So it's bad enough you're in the meeting, you know you're going to walk away with extra stuff to do. So you've got that. Or it can be untangling problems that aren't yours, like grading English papers. Or maybe you've spent time just difficult problems that need to be solved. You've spent a lot of time, and I guarantee you, at the end of the day, there's one thing that you've got on your mind. I just want to put my head on a pillow and go to bed and get that rest. And when you're that tired, your body starts telling you, rest is what I need. Well, there's no doubt in my mind that some of the disciples were really thrilled with this decision that Jesus made about let's get in the boat. For one, I'm not that smart of a guy, but I know that if you got a whole bunch of people on the shore, when I get in this boat and kind of start rowing away, they're not following. There's going to be a time where it's a downtime. And the disciples looked at that. Man, here's a couple of hours for us to go from here to there. This is what the doctor ordered. Hey, you also had these guys like Peter and Andrew that were probably more at home in that boat and on the water than they were on land. So they're thinking, this is a good deal. And they were very comfortable with it. They looked around, it was calm, no wind, no high seas, great situation for heading over to the other side of the lake or the sea. So now they're getting ready to depart the shoreline. So they're going to leave on the western side of the lake. The western side of the lake was the home of what race of people? The Jews. So this is their home field. Now they're going to sail to the eastern side. Who's on the eastern side of the lake? The Gentiles. Now, not so sure about this comfort zone because we're going places where we may not have gone before. So they look in, they get in the boat, they start away, the night is calm, it's quiet. Jesus decides, I'm going to sleep. So it says he grabs this pillow and he goes to sleep in the stern of the boat. Now for you that are like me, nautically challenged, the stern's the rear of the boat. Okay, so he's in the boat, he's going to sleep. Well, as I told you, wait 15 minutes, the weather's going to change. And sure enough, it does. It seems like now, here comes the wind. Starts to come down off of the mountains, and it starts to howl. And it starts to get this sea angry, and the waves are churning. And again, we're in this little wooden boat. And you can imagine, Peter and Andrew may have been okay. You got maybe 10 other guys that, I don't know about this. Not a good decision. And these waves are coming up, and you saw some of them on Lake Superior. 35 and 40-foot waves on a lake. Well, look at this boat. If it's over about 3 feet, you're getting drenched, and you are getting more water in there, and I can see it. You got an eyedropper trying to bail out the water in this ship. Here's where these guys are. They can't get water out fast enough. They're taking on water. And I can tell you, one of the joys, and I don't do a lot of fishing, but one of the greatest joys you have, Delbert, isn't it, when you got that line in the water and you got a bobber on there and you start seeing that thing move. Because it's telling you there's a fish down there. That's not good news with a boat when you look like the bobber. Because you're going up and down, you're filling up with water. Not a good thing. So suddenly, when we leave, it's calm. Man, we haven't got going good before now. It's just terrible. Now we've got a dark night. There's no light at all. The boat is taking on water and they're slowly sinking. And now you can imagine the little huddles on this boat. Well, there are a couple of these disciples sitting there going, man, why are we in this boat? We left good ground over here to come get in this. Why'd we do this? Then they're going, on top of that, where's our leader? He's in the back sleeping. You can see, you can hear the nerves. You're sitting there going, man, we're going down, and there's no help. We got nothing. So then they decide, well, this might be a good time to wake Jesus. And in their mind, they're going to ask him this real pressing question. And we may think that it's a little rude today if we were to do this, but, in a moment of desperation, I can see it. You're down on the boat, you're on this pillow, you're sleeping, and here are these 12 faces. Where do you think they were? In the front of the boat? Nah. There are 12 faces right in front of you. Hey, Jesus, don't you care that we're going to perish? And you can imagine coming out of a dead sleep, what Jesus must have thought. But the same questions we ask today in our life, they may take on a little different look. Maybe the question is, Jesus, don't you care that my child is sick? Or Jesus, my friends have deserted me. Or Jesus, don't you care that I'm feeling all alone? Or Jesus, don't you care that I lost my job? We have all asked these type of questions a million times and in a million different ways. And it's kind of interesting that we don't seem to question the Lord's compassion when things are going well. When we're not in the middle of that storm, we don't question it. The good thing is that God cares just as much when the sea is calm and the sun is shining, or it's tumultuous. Mercy is not limited to sunlight or stillness in these waves. And it's really shown here about his mercy, and this is a real teaching moment from Jesus. And it's so different. I told Mark this morning, I said, last week John the Baptist asked a simple question, didn't he, Matt? Are you the man? Are you the one? How many verses did it take Jesus? And he never really said, yeah, right? So you're thinking, man, after this, after I've seen that, I know what's going to happen here. It's going to be the Declaration of Independence. You're going to get, no, 3 words. And I really appreciate the way Delbert read it. That was his law enforcement training coming to the forefront. We kind of get this idea about Jesus may have been this shy, weak person. I don't think so. I don't think you get up out of a sleep and you're going to get this to come and go, quiet. Be still, please. No. He said, quiet. Be still. And it stopped. So a great teaching moment, because Jesus could have really jumped all over the disciples, but he chose not to. His decision was rebuking the storm. And when we talk about no ordinary man, perfect example. He chose the opportunity to teach his disciples. So they're encouraging words from Jesus. And then he asks them, so why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? And there's a real lesson to be learned here. The disciples were afraid because they were men who were used to being in control of their life. If you remember, Peter was out on that lake, and who asked him to go back out and go fishing? Jesus did. Told him to cast, we've been out all night. Peter's been in charge. If you don't think Peter's in charge, just fast forward a little bit. He's got a sword in his hand. He takes charge. So these were people that were used to dealing with those type of situations. But when put in a life-threatening situation beyond their control, faith turned to fear. And again, I said, Jesus could have just jumped all over his disciples, but that's not his way. He just asked them, have you still no faith? And that's an interesting question. Because if you say yes, you'd be right. If you said no, you'd be right. So it's a great question, Jack, when you're a teacher. I can't get it wrong. That's my favorite test. But when you look at it, the disciples did have faith in Jesus. They certainly believed in him. But their faith, as real as it was not fully grown at this time. And, you know, the thing here is that how do you get this faith that allows you to survive these storms of life? Well, there's an old adage, and I use it a lot, and it's simply, you got to get in the canoe and go downstream. Don't fight upstream like the salmon, get in the boat. And in this case, it's get in the boat and go where Jesus wants to go. So when we look at faith, it's pretty simplistic. If you have no storms in your life, there's probably not going to be a lot of faith. If you have a few storms, there's probably some. But it's going to, your faith is really going to grow when you encounter many of the storms. And that's when much faith will develop. And there's no shortcuts to this spiritual growth. There's no magic word. There's no special potion that's going to do it. The storms of life are not a detour. They're not a mistake. They're not a trick or a trap. They're not sent to harm or destroy you. But there will be times when you feel that way. The storms are sent by God. And the storms can cause you to reach the end of your rope. And you're going to cry out to the Lord in just utter desperation. Do you not care that I'm perishing? And in that moment, when the water is about to engulf us and all that is dear to us is lost, in that moment, the Lord rises and says, quiet, be still. And all of us are going to have these moments. Most of us will have many. Sometimes they're brought on by ourselves by the choices that we make. Sometimes they come because we've done what the Lord has instructed us to do. And sometimes, just like the storm we're looking at here, they come out of nowhere. So there are choices that we must make. And Mark talked about this in class. So you've got to make the choice. Did the Lord send the storm for his own purposes? Or do we believe that the Lord has abandoned us and left us to our own devices? But we can't manipulate God to avoid storms or to make them suddenly disappear. Sometimes our path leads us to the storm, but more times than not, the winds suddenly rise up in our life and turn us upside down and begin to sink us beneath the waves. So there's some things to remember. Jesus is the Lord of the winds and the waves. When he calls us, we need to get in the boat. When he sleeps, we press on. When the storms come, we cry out to him. Then when he awakes, he calms the storm. When the storm is over, our faith is stronger. So currently, you might be in a storm. This is not an accident, it's God's design. For me, several of you know, and you've asked me about it, and I appreciate it, I've been in a storm with my mom and her health. Being 800 miles away puts you at a real disadvantage. It's hard to be there for them. A simple surgery turned into something that was much worse, an infection that we hope is about over. But you really start thinking, when you're 83 years old, what kind of impact is this going to have on your life? So the storms are always going to come up. And you may feel like you're in this all alone, but you're not. You think you've lost everything, but you've not lost the Lord. He's still with you. It says, fear not and keep believing in the Lord, even though you can't see him, or you may not be sensing his presence. When the time comes, He'll say, quiet, be still.